Chapter 11. Inside of a Pouch, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 11. Chapter 11, Inside of a Pouch, 2, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. Okay, time. That was good for a first try. You observed well. Yes, sir. Sun Hwa sighed loudly and collapsed onto her seat. It felt much more exhausting than climbing up and down the stairs. She borrowed Bom's list of words to see what she could have missed. What did I miss? You're good at seeing things from a bird's eye view, Juho said. Sun Hwa looked at him. What do you mean? You see the forest itself rather than the trees. Forest. Sun Hwa checked at the list again. She reflected on the moment she had struggled. That weird liquid, just liquid. She had desperately tried to remember the name of it because she couldn't find any more words. Her mind focused on the details because there was no more information that could be identified from simply looking at the external. She looked around the room again. Just with the lab coat alone there were words like pockets, sleeves and white. Then, she started to see the things that weren't visible moments ago. Was I ever bad with details? By the time Sun Hwa realized it, the rest of the club members did as well. Details are important. Is that the secret? Wouldn't that give a bigger advantage to the person that went after? Oh, yeah. I forgot to tell you, no repeating words. What? Isn't there an advantage for the person who goes first? Just as Seo Kwang was contemplating when he should have his turn, Mr. Moon's words made him think even more. While he was busy thinking, Sun Hwa told Bom, get this over with, Bom. Should I, Mr. Moon, I'll go next. Sure. As if giving up, Seo Kwang quietly raised his fist in front of Juho's eyes. It was an unspoken offer to settle it with a game of rock, paper, scissors. Juho nodded. Winner goes last. Whatever. Rock, paper, scissor. Seo Kwang played rock, and Juho played paper. Juho won. He was going last. Seo Kwang smiled and made Juho a boastful promise to Juho, I'll make sure that there's nothing left for you. Yeah. Do your worst, thought Juho. The timer started, and Bom seemed slightly nervous. She opened her mouth in a hurry. Paper, rope, tree, pencil case, cloth, pen, mechanical pencil, lid, handle, rubber, pen tip, spring, ink. And hair tie, scribble, letters, and. She focused on things that she could find on the desk first. Paper and rope from her notebook and tree was from the desk. Bom hastily looked around. She was definitely more detailed than Sun Hwa, but she was tensing up. It made sense considering that there was a time limit. Moreover, the words Sun Hwa had said kept interrupting her thoughts. The same, repeating words danced around in Bom's mouth. That. Uniform, name tag, slipper, stocking, pants, shirts, vast, activewear, buttons, sleeves, pockets, collar, lining, thread, knot, wrinkle, and. She stumbled through to find more words. There were quite a few words coming out of her mouth. There were long gaps in between, but the result wasn't bad at all. Mr. Moon shouted stop, and Bom returned to her seat while calming her breath. There were still remnants of excitement on her face. That was good, Bom. Oh, it's nothing. I'm kind of embarrassed that I stuttered so much. I didn't even get to look around the room like Sun Hwa did. I must be narrow-visioned. She waved her hand in denial at Sun Hwa's compliments. Bom's approach was definitely more effective than Sun Hwa's, Seo Kwang thought. Seeing how she was pulling out multiple words out of uniform, perhaps we really are overly depend on what we see. My turn. Without saying a word, Mr. Moon started the timer. Xiao Kuang spoke calmly and was not in a hurry. He realized that 2 minutes was not a short time after watching Sun Hua and Bom. There's plenty of time. No rush. Let's see. So, men and women, and things, object, glass, plastic, letters, sentences, self. Introduction, books, bookshelves, title, author, publisher, translator, publish, publish date, edition, issue, cover, paper band, numbers, and. Xiao Kuang thought for a brief moment and continued. Those were words that hadn't been mentioned yet. Light, sunlight, dust, microscopic dust, air, breath, respiration, heat, voice, sound, high pitch, low pitch, student, teacher, time, teenager, friend, friendship, courage, hopes and dreams, peace, youth, and. Xiao Kuang walked over and opened the window. A cool breeze flowed into the room. Refreshing wind. Wow, such youth, Juho said absent-mindedly. Xiao Kuang was blurting out words like friendship, courage and hopes and dreams. It was the fearlessness of youth. Being a fervent reader, he did have a developed sense of language. Wow! That made my heart almost move. That acting. I know. That was good. Sun Hua exaggerated first, although Bom seemed genuinely impressed. Enjoying the responses of the crowd, Xiao Kuang made a proud face. At that, Sun Hua commented, yes, you need attention at that age. Don't be jealous of my senses. I've never been so wronged in my life. By the time their quarreling died down, Bom spoke quietly, that was amazing, Xiao Kuang. You're too kind. Here was another friend who lacked humility. His arrogance was through the roof. Bom was deeply impressed. Words exist even in unseen places, and Xiao Kuang pulled out a fact that Juho had been forgetting. It felt like his vision had widened, so Bom complimented Xiao Kuang. I didn't even think about that. That was incredible. Oh, it was nothing. I am pretty amazing. Yeah, you're amazingly shameless, Juho agreed that Xiao Kuang was amazing, though in a different way from Bom. Her anxiety could have been contagious, but he even walked over to the window to open it. Did one grow more shameless the more he read? No, that was just his personality. He was born with it. Okay. Lastly, Juho's turn, Mr. Moon said. Xiao Kuang went back to his seat. It must be hard having to be your turn right after me. Don't feel too burdened, my friend. It's exhausting to go after a friend who lacks humility, Juho replied with a smile at Xiao Kuang's arrogance. On the other hand, Sun Hua, who was not fond of Xiao Kuang's arrogance, added while glaring at him fiercely, Juho, make sure you start off with the word ass. I was thinking about what other words were left. I'll keep that in mind. Where did you find that word? Right here, on your stupid face. I see that your words are getting edgier. There, settle down. Leaving Bom behind, trying timidly to break up their quarrel, Juho got up from his seat slowly. Keep them in your mouths and clasp them in your hand. The limit was the room, wherever the eye could see. That was probably a trap planted by Mr. Moon. Words were everywhere. Inside, outside, and in between. Xiao Kuang did a great job digging in. In search for words, he bravely jumped into the unseen. Mr. Moon's satisfied smile was the evidence of that. Sun Hua had revealed her bold personality, and Bom caught even the most minute of details. It almost revealed how they viewed the world. What about myself? It's hard to get a feel for something I've never done before. I hope I don't embarrass myself by not being able to say much. No, I'm sure I'll do just as well since I've been observing everyone else, thought Juho. Seeing him standing still, Mr. Moon asked, are you ready? Like everyone else, Juho looked around the room. One by one, familiar sights found their way into Juho's view. Sun Hua and Bom sitting across from him, Co Kwang sitting next to him, Mr. Moon sitting while facing the students, and Baron facing Mr. Moon, dying of boredom. Seeing everyone sitting around the rectangular desk, Juho fixed his sight on one spot. His eyes met with Baron's. Without trying to avoid Juho's gaze, Baron stood up from his seat. Remaining composed even after making an eye contact with an upperclassman, Juho answered with his droopy tone, "I'm ready." "Ready, begin." Baron wondered if Juho was going to ask him if he was black. He did make eye contact with the others as they were busy finding words. From the first year's avoidance of eye contact with him, Baron realized that he wasn't the one who was being avoided, but the words that were surrounding him. Is he going to say them? Those sensitive words, thought Baron. Juho began. People, human, humanity, mankind, character, dignity, human being, personality, appearance, life, lifespan, human nature, existence, living being, heart, me, self, ego, ID, identity, superego, experience, recognition, past, present, future, talent, prosperity, fall, good news, sad news, exciting news, struggle, joy, tears, smile, resentment, annoyance, attachment, love, favor, endearing, affection, happiness, pain, terror, difficulty, anger, fury, hope, fear, sympathy, heart-struck, chaos. Unfamiliarity, inner-person, disgrace, hate, passion, respect, despise, demand, desire, longing, pleasure, displeasure, reminiscence, senses, emotions, sentiment, sensitivity, appreciate, warmth, emotional health, mood, feeling, thoughts, questions, doubt, concern, stage in life, age, opposite. Gender, memories, brain, response, expressions, expectation, reliance, determination, striving, economy, main agent, supervision, true nature, subject, center, core, ethics, sexuality, genes, worth, value. Mind, body, regulations, beauty, knowledge, intelligence, wisdom, philosophy, act, personality, timidity, bold, indifferent, friendly, mysterious, conservative, progressive, rigidity, coquetry, conflict, hypocrisy, rules, wariness, boundary, distance, language, living, society, relations, location, place, characteristics, individual, choice, decision, interest, thinking, conscience, emotional state, intention, tendencies, wants, wishes, volition, soul. Time's up. There was silence in the room after Mr. Moon's exclamation. A wind blew into the room through the open window, and hairs blew with it. Wow! The air began to flow again at Sun Hua's subconscious marveling. That was amazing. Incredible. In midst of it all, Baron wasn't able to say a word. He swallowed, breaking out in a cold sweat. Only Baron felt the look in Juho's eyes as he was tirelessly spewing out words. There was barrenness. It was a dryness without a single drop of moisture. It was desolate and arid. Juho's eyes were digging away at Baron's heart. They stirred at him relentlessly. There was no mercy. Baron felt a burning sensation on his skin from Juho's gaze. Where the air met the skin, his veins and nerves were exposed, vulnerable to incoming danger. He was on edge. Baron gently rubbed his tense, rigid cheek. There were so many things that could be found in that body. The end. Chapter 12. From the inside you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, From the Inside Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudi Owl. He didn't stutter one bit. I lost track. In shock, Co Kwang and Bom murmured to each other. Sun Hua, in awe until a moment ago, frowned in the meantime and replied, "Are you telling me a human can be swarming with that many words? There's something gross about that. You're weird too. Don't you think of those things when you look at other people? Not really. I was just focusing on the words. Sunhwa was getting annoyed by Juho's cheerful denial. His skill was incomparable to somebody who ended her turn with eyes, nose and mouth. There was such a drastic difference even though they were given the same subject. Juho didn't stop even for a brief moment. There was not one bit of hesitation. From the alien words like ID and superego, Sunhwa was able to feel the vast difference in their vocabularies. You have good grades, right? No, not at all. Recognizing Sunhwa's expression growing darker every time he answered, Juho went back to his seat, avoiding eye contact with her. Who are you? What do you mean? Dumbfounded, Seo Kwon looked at Juho. How were you able to say that many words? It's nothing. They're things you hear every day. You haven't even been alive for that long, Seo Kwon said boisterously. Then suddenly, he quietly whispered to Juho, it was nerve-wracking. What? You were looking at Baron the whole time. I thought you were going to say the word. The word. Seo Kwon grew impatient and said in an even quieter voice, like, black. Oh. There just wasn't enough time. Time. Yeah. I worked my way out from the inside. It took me a while to come up to the surface. Baron has a lot on his mind. Seo Kwon was surprised. Black was such an obvious choice. Without intending on belittle Baron, of course. It was not a bad word in and of itself. However, words tend to be sensitive and delicate. It didn't take much for them to turn into something completely different. That was why they needed to be treated with caution. The second anybody brought up the word, everything froze. The air became uncomfortable. Seo Kwon had never met a black person in his life. Though Baron was technically born from a Korean father and a black mother, he was always identified as black because of his skin color. The school never taught him how to respond to situations like that. They never taught what was polite and what was not. Baron wasn't confident about handling words that he'd never seen or learned before. At Baron's jarring appearance and identity, Seo Kwon did everything within his power to avoid contact with him. Seo Kwon tried to think of words that described Baron. This time, from the inside out. Skin. It was the first word looking from outside .in, but from an outward perspective, it was the last word to come up. Inner being, and appearance, Seo Kwon compared the two. When he was getting to know someone, the inner being of that person was the most important thing and what gave the person significance. He took his favorite book and placed it onto the shelf. He felt empty. He felt stupid for living in anxiety that entire time. He looked at his notebook. The page was filled with Juho's words. Next to it, Seo Kwon wrote other words. Black. Dark. They felt so insignificant next to Juho's vocabulary. Though Seo Kwon had more to say, he had to stop himself as Mr. Moon began speaking. Good job. I assume that this was everyone's first attempt, but I could see that you're all learning. As you saw from Juho, there are always plenty of words you can think of even when you're not supposed to repeat words. Even in this tiny room. Juho did an excellent job. It had been noticeable from his self-introduction. There was something about him. His vocabulary was impressive, but it wasn't the only thing Mr. Moon had been shocked by. The room is full of useless things. Considering that it was being used as the school storage room, there were countless random things. Of course, as Seo Kwon had said earlier, there were plenty of unseen words. With Juho's vocabulary, it wouldn't have been too difficult to capture even more words. Among the many candidates, Juho had fixed his eyes on Baron. Also, he ignored the most obvious difference. Mr. Moon glanced over to Juho as he was sat quietly. If he was shrinking the gap between Baron and the rest of the club members with a conscious effort, he would be beyond ordinary. On the other hand, Baron was surrounded by strange emotions. All Juho did was list words, but his feelings were swaying left and right as if he had been comforted. Because he had already decided to take no interest in the business of the first years, Baron had always thought that he wouldn't be taking the initiative to talk to them. He looked at Juho's calm face. Who is this guy? Baron was tingling with a new curiosity. Ah! Xiao Kuang made a curious sound. Sun Hua glanced over at him, but Xiao Kuang's eyes were on Juho. What? Did something get on my face? Juho was no different from the usual, but Xiao Kuang was convinced of something. This guy schemed something similar in the past. This was calculated. It was intentional. You nut job. What's this about all of a sudden? Juho felt like he was being falsely accused by his friend, but Xiao Kuang didn't mind. He kept at it, nut job. I've never been to the school library. Me neither. I've been here before. With the exception of Xiao Kuang, it was everyone's first visit to the school library. They weren't there because they wanted to be. They were at the library because of the mission given by Mr. Moon. Each of you will check out one book from the library. There's no criteria, except you must pick a book among the ones you've read. The interior of the library was visible through the glass entrance. The first thing that could be seen were the books that were on the shelves. Xiao Kuang hummed excitedly. The library was about the size of a classroom. It was not a big library, by any means. Still, the library was brimming with books. As the members walked into the library, they encountered a group of students from the book club, reading on their desks. Seeing how they weren't startled by their presence, the book club must have already known about the visit. You're all from the literature club, right? Grab what you're looking for and leave quietly. You got it. The Chinese teacher warned them sternly as the literature club came into the library. He was not only known as the homeroom teacher for the book club, but also for his strictness. With Juho being the only calm individual, the nervous first years quietly walked away from the Chinese teacher as fast as they could. As they blindly followed the tall bookshelves, the members reached the new .release section. Next to it, was a small plastic container. It appeared that students could write out requests for their desired books. Inside of a clear plastic container, were only 5 sheets of paper. They matched the number of book club members who happened to be reading in the library. They have the trace of a bird. They're quick. It must have been in high demand. The book was shelved at the frontmost row. Sun Hua asked Xiao Kuang as he pulled it out, did you pick one already? As a candidate. Why do you ask? I have another book if you need one. I told you, I haven't read it yet, but you still haven't read it. I'm telling you, you won't regret it. Meh, whatever. I'll never conform to the trend. As the voice of the two grew louder, Juho said to them, the Chinese teacher is looking in our direction. Their voices shrunk quickly. Juho left Xiao Kuang and Sun Hua behind and moved on to the next aisle. It was labeled, literature. Getting a closer look, Juho discovered that the aisle was divided into Japanese, Korean and English. His steps came to a halt in front of the Korean section. Author. Hyun Do Lim. Title. The Mirror. I didn't know I'd find Hyun Do Lim's work here, Juho thought. He immediately pulled out the book from the shelf. Hyun Do Lim was one of the authors Juho admired. He was an author who had never ceased to write, even until his death. His last, full-length novel left a deep impression in Juho's heart. It was a book that Juho had purchased with the little money he had left when Juho was living a homeless life. Once he had gotten his hands on the book, Juho read it over and over again. In other words, that book was an answer sheet to all of the questions in life. Yes, this sounds better. This is a better portrayal. Every single words had been carefully placed with precise calculation by the author. The writing was tenacious, perhaps closer to obsessive. At times, it had made Juho think if it was even possible for him to write in such a way. Juho pulled out the book and opened it to the first page. Along with his young hand gently brushing down the photo, he saw a face that looked much younger than he remembered. He's such a good-looking man. Hyun-doo Lim looked much younger than his age. On top of that, he was handsome even to the eyes of other men. His name would always come up when discussing good-looking authors. When all the authors his age had retired and were no longer writing, Hyun-doo Lim never put down his pen. Did you pick one? Not yet. Seo Kwang asked Juho, peeking his head through an opening between the shelves. As Juho was about to place the book back, he came to a sudden halt. Actually, this might be the one. I enjoyed The Mirror quite a bit, thought Juho. I'm going with this one. Juho heard Seo Kwang approach him from the English literature section. In his hand, there was a book by a world-renowned author, Kelly Coyne, called Witch Hunt. It was her debut work before she became famous. I didn't think I'd find books like that in the library. I should have come here more often, thought Juho. Then he added, that's much better than The Trace of a Bird. I disagree. I think it's impossible to compare the two. Except. Then, Seo Kwang suddenly hardened his expression. What is it? Did you really think that I'd be so quick to pick a book by an author my age? Even as a fellow writer. Then, he put The Trace of a Bird back into the shelf. A book made it back to the shelf through a person's hand, and Juho watched. He had never witnessed such a scene. No person had ever picked up Juho's book at a bookstore and put them back down. Actually, there must have been other people. It must have been that he just never witnessed it in person. Juho smirked. He didn't think that there had been any remnant of such feeling in his heart. Ever so slightly, Juho felt upset, perhaps even a little hurt. Having chosen a book in no time, Sunhwa told Seo Kwang while sneering at him, the author isn't even aware of your existence, you know. He doesn't have to be. I don't know who he is either, he quickly fired back at her. Of course, she wasn't the type to give up. Right as she was about to speak, Bom approached her from behind. Sunhwa, what do you think it'd be a better choice between these two books? Ha! Bom questioned Sunhwa while holding a book in each hand. Both books were included in a literature compilation book from the same publishing company. I've only read the book on the left. Did you? As soon as she got an answer from Sunhwa, Bom walked over to the other side of the bookshelf. Then, she returned momentarily with another book. It was the book Sunhwa had mentioned. Should we head out? We'll be checking these out. With his usual stern expression, the Chinese teacher quietly checked out the books for the first years. As he returned each of the books to them, he emphasized, treat them with care. You're not the only ones reading them. Yes, sir, the first years answered him bravely and returned to the science room. The Chinese teacher didn't seem all that scary after all, said Bom. I've never met anyone who treats their books with respect when he's a jerk, Seo Kwang answered her joyfully. At that moment it was almost impossible to tell whether he was the same fearful person who had avoided joining the book club because of the teacher in charge. Sunhwa and Juho both agreed. Juho looked at the book he had in his hand. It was very well taken care of. The stern Chinese teacher didn't feel as intimidating as he used to feel. The end. Chapter 13. A clue regarding an identity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 13. Chapter 13, A clue regarding an identity. Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudi Owl. When the first years returned from the library, there was a small change in the science room. Next to Mr. Moon, was a mound of crumpled-up graph-like paper that came up to his calves. We're the literature club, for God's sake. We should at least be writing on Korean manuscript paper. Mr. Moon distributed the sheets of paper to each member. Juho saw the red squared on the paper in front of him and thought, it's been a while. You all know the writing format for this paper, right? Just barely. That's true. It's really tricky to understand, especially when writing a citation page. The kids were staring at their sheets of paper as if they had never seen them before. Mr. Moon encouraged them and began to explain things. What do you think the reason is for leaving the first square blank when starting a paragraph? He stopped for a brief moment and went on to answer his own question. So, it looks neat. The kids appeared unsatisfied with Mr. Moon's answer. A piece of writing exists to be read. Moving down a line when starting a new paragraph or dialogue is for this very purpose. It enables the readers to read more comfortably. If everything was stuck together back to back, it'd be impossible to read. So, you switch over to the next line and skip a square. Then, what do you think you should do when the dialogic sentence starts to get longer? Sunhwa thought briefly, and answered carefully, go to the next line. Why? So it looks better. That's correct. She was truly like an exemplary student. Even while Mr. Moon was explaining punctuation, Arabic numerals and spacing in the English alphabet, he emphasized repeatedly that writing existed to be read. Manuscript paper, according to him, was like a well-decorated cake. As the students slowly began to come to grasp how to write using the manuscript paper, Mr. Moon explained the mission he had previously given. He revealed why he had sent everyone all the way to the library in the middle of club activities. Do you guys know what a transcription is? We've heard of it, but it's definitely not something you hear every day, Baum answered. The others must have felt no different. How about copying? We've heard of that, mainly when I got in trouble with my teacher, Seo Kwang said playfully, as if he was reminiscing to a time when he had been caught. They mean the same thing. From now on, you guys are going to be transcribing the book that you checked out from the library. We're copying them. The word copy had an unpleasant connotation. As Seo Kwang had said earlier, the word was often associated with warning statements. A student could get into a world of trouble with the teacher for copying his friend's homework. Mr. Moon took a deep breath and started speaking. The copying we're about to do is for practice. It's a commendable deed. You guys might not be aware, but you'll find this often when a famous author is being interviewed. I've transcribed the work of an author I respect the most. It wasn't clear who he was imitating, but Juho understood what Mr. Moon was saying. For the Wood.be novelists, transcription was something they tried at least once. It was a natural occurrence. For anybody who aspired to be a novelist, even without being told, if he or she was human, there would be at least one or two authors he or she admired. When memorizing the names of every single book written by an author and reading their work repeatedly no longer satisfied one's heart, one began to copy the author's writing. I want to be able to write like this person. I'm jealous of everything this author has. I'm mesmerized by his writing. It was a heart like that that motivated them to move their hands, so that they could turn their idol's talents into their very own. One thing to be mindful of when you're copying is to not do it in a hurry. You have to follow the intention of the author as is. In order to do that, you copy every character down to every single punctuation. Yes, Mr. Moon. That's right. Something any Wood.be novelist tried at least once. For that reason, Juho didn't have experience with transcription. His first full-length novel had been his debut work, which meant that he couldn't be considered to be an aspiring novelist. Juho opened his book, The Winter, written by Hyun-do Lim, and started with a narration of the protagonist reminiscing about his past. He was an old man, well past his 60s, and was an unwavering and stubborn person. He had declared to his family that he would not be joining them on a family trip that had been long due. After all, his wife and child had left him behind. Left alone, the old man spent time going through various emotions and eventually came to recognize the three brothers living next door. They always played near the old man's house. He spent time listening to their conversations. Soon, the eldest among the three got bullied by the other two, and the old man believed that the two were doing the right thing. He found himself in a good mood. Then, the old man received a call and discovers that his family had been tragically killed. Finally, the old man looked into the mirror and ended his story. Juho looked around. Mr. Moon was gone and Seo Kwang was distracted, reading instead of writing. Sun Hwa and Bom were working hard on transcribing their books. So, Juho slowly copied the content of his book. It was the scene when the old man declared his solitude after sending his family away. Although their deaths were yet to be known by the old man, he lethargically reminisced about his life. That perilous tone itself was foreshadow. It was quiet and lonely and it was consistent from the beginning and to the end of the novel. As he copied the novel, Juho felt down for no apparent reason. He was experiencing the extreme emotions that existed in midst of silence. It was different from merely reading. It was blatant and uncomfortable. He put down his pen for a brief moment. After taking a short break, he asked Baron, who was in the middle of drawing, a question. What are you drawing, Baron? A book illustration. He gave Juho a short answer, and Juho looked closer and saw the printed images. There was a character with a playful expression holding a rice paddle in one hand. He appeared to be Nal.Bu. Aside from the character, there were also the drawings of a freckled girl in a dress and a kid with a runny nose. It was artwork to be inserted in between the pages of a novel. Though the genre was different, Baron seemed to be participating in a form of copying. In his case, he wanted to be able to draw better. Overhearing the conversation, Seo Kwang poked his head in, looked at the drawings and asked, "When did you start drawing?" "When I was young. I went to an art institute instead of kindergarten. So, it's been a while." Baron shrugged without saying much. He seemed to be putting even more distance between himself and the other club members. Juho recognized that and no longer tried to talk to him. Although Seo Kwang was someone who knew when to push and when to pull away, he too no longer tried to interact with Baron. Sun Hwa was glaring fiercely at the guys as they talked. Soon, there was only the sound of friction between pen and paper. As soon as the members finished transcribing about 7 pages, the bell rang and indicated the end of club activities. The next day, Bom made a move to convince Baron to give her a sample of his writing. Unlike Sun Hwa previously, Bom had been discreet. "So, it's a bribe." "Not exactly. Wouldn't it have been better if you handed it to him in person?" "It won't do anything if the receiver doesn't know the giver." "I felt weird about handing it to him in person." Bom couldn't gather her words between Sun Hwa and Seo Kwang's discussion. Apparently, she had come to school early and gone into the empty second-year classroom to leave a bag on Baron's desk. The bag was filled with other bags of chips and cookies. When did she find the time to watch Baron eat? Juho thought to himself, impressed by her. Does this mean you can demand a written note from Baron as he munches on your chips and cookies? "I'll take your writing as payment. What? Bom was startled by Juho's words. "What's the matter? Didn't you give Baron all those snacks to get him to write something for you?" "It's true, but I don't feel confident about speaking to him directly." "Do as Sun Hwa did, as if you were blind." "Who's blind?" "That's even worse." As Sun Hwa appeared, Bom expressed a strong denial to Juho. At the end, Bom wasn't able to ask for anything, so she had left Baron a gift without even revealing her name. Despite Seo Kwang's frustration over her generosity, that was the extent of her effort. As if left with no choice, Seo Kwang shook his head and said, "Very well. I'll tell Baron while I'm on it." "Huh. He must have had a plan." "What is it? What are you planning on doing?" Sun Hwa asked. "Hold on to your hats." After seeing his confident display, Juho had already lost interest. Ignoring the insincere response of the crowd, Seo Kwang kept on, "If you want something from a person, then you should prepare something he wants." Duh. That's obvious. That was why Bom had given all those snacks to Baron, like Robin Hood. Then, there's one question left. What does Baron want? Snacks. Bom answered timidly, and Xiao Kuang gestured at her answer. Snacks are good, but I have something more delicious in my hand. What is it, chocolate? Sun Hua answered in a lukewarm manner. Realizing that Xiao Kuang wasn't going to stop anytime soon, Juho took out a book from his bag. It was The Winter, the book he had checked out of the library for transcription, and he thought to himself that he'd read it again from cover to cover as he transcribed it. I found a clue for the author who wrote The Trace of a Bird. Juho's hand stopped in its place. Are you serious? Where did you find it? Tell us. He can't possibly be talking about me, thought Juho as he slowly put down his book. In contrast to his calm appearance, his mind was working frantically. Yun Wu. Identity. Clue. There hadn't been any updates from the editor either. Whoa. Control yourselves. Did Baron read the book too? I saw it with my own eyes. Juho had seen it too. The book Baron had read on his first day of club activities had been The Trace of a Bird. He still remembered the expression on Xiao Kuang's face when he saw the book in Baron's hand. He looked like he was about to wrap his arm around Baron. How do you know that he's a fan of the author though? It's weird to make an assumption like that just because he was reading the book. That's true, Juho agreed silently. There was no proof that Baron was obsessed with the author simply because he had read the book. As if he was mocking Juho and Sun Hua, Xiao Kuang clicked his tongue and said, since he's read the book, it'd be impossible for Baron not to be curious about the author. You know, not everyone's like you just because they're a fan. Who said anything about a fan? I'm simply saying that he'd be curious. Imagine you found $10,000 on the street. Wouldn't you think about who it belonged to? It would too big of an amount, so you wouldn't be able to celebrate either. You'd stay up all night deciding whether you should take it to the police or not. The Trace of a Bird is just like that. What the heck are you talking about? How can book and money be the same? You know, I can't help but notice that you've been commenting on my analogies. Seeing how the two were starting to digress, Bom chimed in. She was curious about the clue Xiao Kuang had found on the mysterious author. Xiao Kuang, did you find out who the author of The Trace of a Bird is? Yes, that's the main focus. Xiao Kuang cleared his throat and lowered his voice. The room felt hushed, and he pulled out a piece of paper from his chest. So, I ran into something really interesting on a blog. Show us. Standing behind Sun while holding Xiao Kuang's piece of paper in her hand, Juho read the note faster than anyone else there. The first thing that caught his eyes was the title. Revealing the identity of Yun Wu, the author of The Trace of a Bird. The intent was quite provocative. The end. Chapter 14. A beautiful, book-loving girl. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, A Beautiful, Book-Loving Girl. Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. The protagonist, Yun, was named and created after the author himself. That's not true, Juho thought. Between the mysterious, anonymous author and the protagonist who moves about at night, there's a resemblance in the impression that the two give off. Good, I think I can relax. Juho was able to stay at ease up to that point. That blog post had started from the hypothesis that The Trace of a Bird had been written based on the life experiences of the author. The blog emphasized that the protagonist of the book and the author himself were of the same age. However, what Juho had written was a novel. It was imagination that came out of his head. It was a made-up story. It was a lie that had been finely dressed in the spirit of prose. It was not entirely inaccurate to say that the author's experiences had had some influence in his writing, but the book wasn't about his story itself. So, who wrote this? He goes by Hong Sam on the internet. Unfortunately, Hong Sam couldn't be more wrong. Yet, the kid seemed to think otherwise. This sounds plausible, doesn't it? I get the impression that it might well be, Xiao Kuang and Sun Hua said to each other. What is it saying? I can't really see. At Bomb's curiosity, Sun Hua gave her a brief summary of the blog post. Hong Sam's claim was as such: the author has a detailed, yet brilliant style of writing. Despite his young age, he possesses a distinct personality. The author gradually builds up the story into a climax. His deceivingly mature writing has shocked and touched the hearts of many. The true surprise of this book lies in the sentiment that's being communicated to the readers. For an author to be able to capture such profound emotions in his writing, one can only assume that he must have lived through experiences that inspired him. Therefore, just like Yun, the protagonist of The Trace of a Bird, there's a chance that the author may not be attending high school. Even if this conjecture is not entirely true, I carefully entertain the possibility that the author detached from the outside world at some point in his past. Having read up to that point, Sun Hua took a moment to catch her breath before moving on to the next page. At the end of the post, there was a final conclusion for the modern-day people who simply couldn't afford the time to read such a post. In other words, considering all the hypotheses thus far, the image of the author, Yunwoo, can be portrayed as a beautiful girl enjoying a book on a warm, sunny day. What? Everyone doubted what they had just read. What? A warm, sunny day. A beautiful, book-loving girl. Sun Hua didn't appear to be impressed either. On the other hand, Xiao Kuang had a happy smile on his face. Sigh, what is this? She said. What? It's nice. A beautiful, innocent, book-loving girl, Xiao Kuang countered. This is delusional. Come on. A beautiful girl enjoying a book on a warm, sunny day. We got excited for nothing. Yeah, this is straight up delusional. Even Bomb was taking a firm stance in the matter. Juho nodded his head to blend in with the others. Yep. Delusional. He was dumbfounded by what he had just read, a beautiful, book-loving girl. Am I, Yunwoo, actually associated with these words? My common, high-school student self would be seriously disappointed. I think Yunwoo is male, Sun Hua said confidently. Juho rooted for her silently. That's right, Yunwoo is a he. Why do you think that? That's what I'm hoping for, a good-looking guy who's also my age. Juho quickly retracted the cheers directed at Sun Hua. I wish him to be a muscular, high school boy. In an instant, Juho had discovered the ideal tastes of two individuals. To be associated with a book-loving girl or a muscular, high school boy was quite a burden for him. Muscular. You don't say. Then, what about, book-loving girl? Right, Boem? Yeah, right. What's wrong with, book-loving girl? Juho, say something. Juho shook his head firmly. Seeing the loathing expression on Juho's face, Xiao Kuang realized that no one was around to take his side. For the time being, he took a step back. Of course, this is Hong Sam's personal opinion, so I admit that there could be some bias in his words. Still, his observations up to that point sound plausible, don't they? It's already over if it ends with a beautiful, book-loving girl. Come on, guys. The responses in the comments section aren't all that bad by then. Xiao Kuang had already lost his friend's trust, so he quickly moved on to the main point. This isn't the point. It's bait. If Baron falls for this, then that's all that matters. You really think he would fall for something like that? Just watch. I'll be the first to get him to write. Xiao Kuang sprung out of his seat. It wasn't long until Xiao Kuang returned with a sad face. A book-loving girl must have been of little help. Back already? Juho asked. Xiao Kuang answered sadly, do you know what renders bait useless? What? when it loses its freshness. Baron had already known about the blog post. He looked at me like I was the most pathetic person. I couldn't have known in my dreams that he'd already known. Xiao Kuang continued with a defeated expression, if Baron knows about Hong Sam's blog, then he's definitely a fan. I'm sure of it. Xiao Kuang explained to his friends that Hong Sam was a famous blogger among Yunwu fans. It was hard to understand why he was famous, let alone trustworthy. Xiao Kuang grabbed his hair in despair. He seemed discouraged that the plan he had been so sure of had ended in failure. Juho thought about consoling his friend, but Sun Wa's laughter beat him to it. There was no way she would leave him alone, especially when he was so vulnerable. I knew it. Some big talker you are. I underestimated how big of a fan Baron was, Xiao Kuang said as he angrily clenched his fists. You shouldn't beat around the bush when you're trying to win a person's heart, you know. You gotta tackle it head on. You're really into this whole head-on approach. What are you, a boar? Would you like to find out what it feels like to be rammed by a boar? Xiao Kuang was bursting with anger from Sun Wa's mocking, but Sun Wa was not someone who would let another person call her names, especially something like a boar. Bom was standing next to her anxiously as Sun Wa started getting ready to ram into Xiao Kuang. Even in midst of all of that, Juho's heart was not in peace. Baron being a fan of Yunwu meant that he was a fan of Juho. Baron, a fan. Having a fan was not something foreign to him. If anything, he was closer to being familiar with it. Before he returned to the past, he had even come out in public. Compared to the present, there had been more people around him, including fans. Still, the emotion Juho was experiencing was something he was not used to. A friend-turned-fan. A fan-turned-friend. It was merely in a different order, yet there was a blatant difference. Baron hadn't been a friend from the get-go. It was embarrassing. For some reason, Juho's palm started itching. Then, Juho must be the only person left. Me. Yeah, you. Everyone else approached Baron in their own way, except for you. There was hope in the way everyone looked at him, and Juho scratched his face and responded, don't put your hopes up. You'll be disappointed. Who said anything about hoping? So, did you have anything in mind, like a plan? Then how do you guys explain the curiosity in your eyes? Juho thought. Then, he continued with a smile on his face, I do have a plan. What is it? It's a secret. Both Xiao Kuang and Sun Wa jeered at his answer. They got along only in moments like that. Juho ignored their jeering and said, okay, guys. That's enough. Even though he was someone being jeered at, Bom looked even more anxious than him. He stared into the ceiling for a brief moment and stood up from his seat. That moment, the bell started ringing. It was the end of recess. Damn it. Juho sat back down, and Sun Wa and Bom returned to their class. Xiao Kuang asked as he sat next to Juho, so, what are you going to do? I'll tell you when I get back. The teacher's coming. As class started, Juho stared out the window and organized his thoughts. Juho climbed the stairs up to the second year's floor. He thought about the writing he needed to get from Baron as he went up the stairs. To figure out a way to move Baron's heart, Juho had been watching Sun Wa, Bom, and Xiao Kuang. Juho had been observing things during recess, lunch, PE, remote classes, club activities, and after school. Those were the times when he could naturally run into Baron. Baron was ordinary. Just like all the other students, he took classes, took naps during recess, ate and read or drew during lunch. He was also a loner. His life outside of the club didn't look very different. Although, he didn't seem to study the materials that were different from the lessons, unlike how he was during club activities. Bait. Juho has been looking for a bait that Baron would find irresistible. Then, finally, Juho found what he had been looking for. Baron was also keeping his eyes on a person, and that person was his female classmate. Juho labeled her in his mind as barren girl. Juho knew nothing about barren girl. He'd never met her before, let alone talked to her. However, one thing was certain, that girl, very much like Baron, didn't talk to anyone around her. In other words, she too was a loner. Juho arrived at Baron's class. He looked for Baron, but he didn't seem to be around. Not only that, but there seemed to be a commotion in the classroom. What's going on, thought Juho. Give it to me, now. There was a threatening voice. With an angry look on her face, a girl wearing a red hairpin was standing in front of another girl. It was Barren Girl. Despite the girl angrily demanding something from her, Barren Girl was sitting completely still without saying a word. For a brief moment, Juho was able to catch a glimpse of her looking like she was being wronged. You were the only person in the classroom during PE. You're the person who took my cell phone, aren't you? Aha! Juho understood what the commotion was about from that sentence alone. The girl wearing the red hairpin suspected Barren Girl of being the thief who stole her cell phone. Everyone in the class was watching the two, but nobody dared to get between them to help resolve the conflict. Don't you just sit there quietly. Give me back my phone, now. The girl wearing the red hairpin was getting worked up. The cell phone must have been quite expensive. When a student lost an item, it didn't end with just a heartache. Not only would she have to withstand scolding and punishment from her parents, but she would also have to live on without her cell phone until her parents bought her a new one. There was no way she could afford a new cell phone on her own. Juho had no trouble living life even without a cell phone of his own, but to another, it could be something more important than her life. The girl wearing the red hairpin was fiercely glaring at Barren Girl. Seeing how angry she was, her phone must have meant a great deal to her. I just got it yesterday. I'm sure you'd want one being that it's the newest model, but it belongs to me. I won't cause any more ruckus, so please just give it back to me. Her tone was rude, yet desperate. Having lost her latest model phone, the girl was growing more flustered by the minute. She was already certain that Barren Girl was the culprit. After listening quietly up to that moment, Barren Girl finally opened her lips. How many times do I have to tell you that I didn't steal it? If not you, then who? You were the only one here in the classroom during PE. Sure enough, Barren Girl wasn't just simply staying silent. Rather, she had already given her final answer. In spite of that, the girl wearing the red hairpin was not letting up. It was a standoff. At that moment, Juho realized something that bothered him. This was a school. There was always a thief in a school. That thief struck regularly and stole textbooks, portable gaming consoles and, at times, even slippers. Usually, the range of victims spanned a class. If one's friend sitting next to him got his textbook stolen, there was a good chance that both of their textbook had been stolen. In a case like that, the entire class became infuriated. On the other hand, others became anxious about becoming the next target. That was the common progression of such a scenario. Juho looked around. Everyone was just watching with fascinated looks, which meant that the girl wearing the red hairpin had been the only victim so far. Still persisting, are you? The girl was furious. Her patience must have worn out. Juho realized that the situation no longer granted him the luxury of watching from afar. She was trembling with fierce anger, looking like she'd slap Barren Girl at any moment. Juho's lips parted. The teacher's looking for you. What? Barren Girl looked at Juho with a shocked expression on her face. She wasn't the only one looking at him at that point. Many others had their eyes fixed on him, and Juho repeated, the teacher's looking for you. The end. Chapter 15. The Sole Artist in the Literature Club, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 15. Chapter 15, The Sole Artist in the Literature Club, 1, translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudi Owl. To reiterate, this was a school. In a school, there are teachers and students, and then there are thieves. Unfortunately, there was no law enforcement at schools. No such thing existed in such an unique environment like a school. When a handful of students fell victim to a mysterious thief, the class president informed the teacher. Then, the teacher assessed the damage and comforted the victims in the class. Simultaneously, the teacher threatened the potential thief among his students, and then closed the case. Much like corporal punishment, seeking out or catching a thief was prohibited. It was a school after all. In other words, without barren girl in the picture, the case came to a halt. Removing her from the classroom was not a difficult task. "Who are you?" the girl wearing a red hairpin asked sharply, but Juho didn't answer. He kept his eyes on barren girl and rushed her. "Hurry. Mr. Moon is looking for you." "Yeah, okay." She was dumbfounded by Juho's sudden appearance, but soon, she was drawn to Juho's calm words. As the two were just on their way out of the classroom, Juho felt somebody snatch him. It was the girl with the red hairpin, and she was staring at him with piercing eyes. "Hold up. What is it?" "Mr. Moon said it was an emergency." "You're a first year, aren't you? You came here with your friends not too long ago." "That's right. I needed to speak to the same person." Her eyes were full of anger, and Juho sighed. It was going to be more complicated than he thought. "It's you guys, huh? Damn it. What is?" Juho asked as if he were confused. Seeing his reaction, the girl accused Juho even angrier than before. "You guys took my cell phone." "Nope." Like she had done with barren girl, she was looking at Juho with the same accusatory expression. "Then what were the first years doing in our class? Weren't you scouting for anything valuable?" "No wonder my phone's gone as soon as I got a new one." "That's not true. Give me the class number and names of your classmates." "All of them. I'm turning in every single one of you to the police." That was an obvious strategy. She brought up the police to intimidate a first year. In this case, Juho, who responded calmly, "Aren't you supposed to turn your cell phones in as soon as you get to school? You've been talking about your cell phone this entire time. Did you get your bag stolen with your phone in it?" The girl was getting aggravated. It was a rule for students to place their cell phones into a designated bag in their respective classes before the morning announcements ended. The teachers took those bags and stored them in the staff room until the end of the school day. It was a rule created to prevent such accidents from the inception of the cell phone. Obviously, she wasn't the only one who didn't follow the rule. However, nobody ever caused a scene like that girl. You can't be stealing from other people. That's bad. I agree. Stealing is bad. It's also bad to falsely accuse someone for it. Her eyes lit up with anger again. Juho looked at her face. Face. There were tears in her eyes, and she appeared to be quite anxious. Sigh. "You know, there's a limit to making excuses. I'm sure you're anxious after losing something that belonged to you, but I'm offended that I'm being treated like the culprit." "What's so wrong about that? My phone disappeared after you guys showed up. I heard that the door was open this morning." "It was you guys, huh? Morning. Door." Juho immediately thought of someone. BOM had come to school early to leave snacks for Baron. It couldn't have been her. She didn't have what it took. Juho took a brief moment to think. As if seizing her chance, the girl raised her voice, "Hurry up and bring everyone else. Give me back my phone." Sigh. Things were back to square one. At that rate, nothing would get through her head. Juho looked around in search of someone who could calm her down. Baron Girl was nowhere to be seen, and the other second years were watching from afar. Among them, Juho found someone who looked to be the girl's friend and thought, what's this person doing standing there and watching? So much noise. Juho heard a deep voice from behind. The bluntness in the tone sounded quite familiar. Without even having to turn around, Juho knew immediately who that voice belonged to. It was the reason why Juho was there in the first place. It was Baron. What's this about? His voice resounded throughout the quiet classroom. He looked around once and then fixed his eyes on the girl with the red hairpin. She seemed to be intimidated by Baron's presence looking down at her. Juho smiled despite the atmosphere. He has got stepping up to something like this. It makes sense him being the only person drawing in an literature club, thought Juho. Baron caught him smiling at a glance and quickly guessed the purpose of his visit. Is it your turn? Yes. I'm only here to ask you to write something for me, but who would have known there would be such a commotion? Baron turned to the girl, you heard him. He's here to see me. Same for the other first years. If you were a first year, would you dare come up to the second year's floor to steal? That's always possible. They could have taken it while they were here, the girl snapped back at Baron, determined to stand her ground. Oh, my lord, Baron let out a sigh, having realized that she wasn't going to listen. Triggered by his reaction, the girl asked, are you one of them? No, then, tell your first year to give me back my cell phone. He said he didn't take it. Why do you keep asking? At Baron's response, the girl made a frustrated face as if she were the one supposed to be frustrated. Before Baron could speak out in anger, Juho asked, did you look under the desk? What do I look like, an idiot? Of course, I looked. Did you look in between the textbooks? I don't keep textbooks under my desk. Then all the more reason to look. Inattention brings about mistakes. She scoffed at Juho. You're not thinking about running away from this while I'm looking under the desk, are you? Juho did consider that. If running away could solve the issue, Juho would have done it 100 times over. Seeing the state she was in though, she'd have followed Juho to the ends of the earth. No way. It's just a possibility. There's always a possibility. The girl frowned and snatched at Juho's wrist and dragged him to her desk. Then she shoved his other hand into the desk. She seemed certain that her phone wasn't going to be in there. She waved her hands for everyone else to see. Her hand made a clicking noise under the desk, and Juho watched her. Tap. Her hand had knocked something out of the desk. It rolled for a little while until it stopped at someone's feet. It was a cell phone. The newest model cell phone that she had been desperately looking for. She stared at the phone that fell on the ground and didn't move a muscle. Then, her face turned bright red. Her face was even redder than at the moment when she was shouting angrily at people. She moaned, why, is this? Juho picked up the cell phone and handed it to her. She took it without saying a word, and he realized that her hands were ice cold. There was confusion among all the other kids who were watching. Is that the phone? Hey, you should have looked more carefully, somebody said in the midst of the awkwardness. It was a girl, the girl who had been watching among the crowd, the same person who looked to be friends with the girl with the red hairpin. Another person chimed in and said, you should apologize and get this over with. Two people stood to the sides of the red hairpin girl. She let her head drop and didn't say another word. One of her friends spoke up on her behalf. Both of them waved their hands at the crowd with a smile on their faces. Sorry. She's a bit hot-headed. She gets blinded to her surroundings when she's angry. She must be really embarrassed right now. I apologize on her behalf. Seriously. We're sorry. I knew this was going to happen, you Dumbo. The atmosphere lightened up at their light-hearted remarks. There was laughter in the classroom and sounds of chattering. In the midst of the business, the red hairpin girl kept quiet. Even with her friends poking fun at her, her head stayed low. Why is this class so loud? Mr. Moon said as he peeked his head through the front door. It wasn't time for class yet. Joo-ho looked at him wondering why he was there, and Mr. Moon returned the same look. What's a first year doing here? Go downstairs. Yes, sir. Joo-ho saw barren girl standing next to Mr. Moon. At that, he realized that it was she who had brought him. At that moment, Baron eyed Joo-ho to leave with him. On his way out, Joo-ho approached the girl who was still red from embarrassment. Hearing Joo-ho approach her, she raised her chin and looked at him. I saw your two friends putting their hand under the desk, he whispered. Her eyes opened up. Her motionless eyes were telling him that she understood what he said. Having confirmed that, Joo-ho quietly went on his way. What did you say to her? Nothing. Joo-ho pondered things as he answered Baron. When he was looking at the girl's friend, Baron appeared. All eyes were on him. At that moment, Joo-ho saw two people acting suspiciously among the crowd. One of them took out a cell phone out of her pocket and slipped it into a desk. When he saw that, Joo-ho felt his palm itching. The girl must have been showing off her new cell phone. Bothered by that sight, her two friends plotted to screw her over. However, things were blown out of proportion by their hysterical friend. It was more than they could handle. They couldn't have stepped up to fix the situation in midst of such a ruckus. Since the two couldn't step up, they had to hide their tracks. They agreed to hide the phone under the desk without anyone knowing. They weren't just hiding the phone. It was also an effort to hide their guilt. The time came for them to speak up on their friend's behalf, and the two made their move. Joo-ho looked at the red hairpin girl as he was leaving the classroom. In the middle of her friends trying to encourage her, she remained still with her phone in her hand. Those were people who were trying desperately to shift their blame onto others. The three friends were quite similar in that aspect. Coming out of the school building, Joo-ho walked into the shade of a tree in the corner of the yard. The branches were spread out, and that meant more shade. Next to the tree were the pulled-up bars. Joo-ho looked away from the bright reflection of the bars and told Baron, thanks for the help. I didn't help, Baron answered tersely, and said that he was only telling the truth. Telling the truth is the hard part. Other second years weren't just watching for no reason. I'm different from everyone else. Even in color, Baron said as he shook his hand in front of Joo-ho. His large, dark-skinned hand swayed left and right. Of course. It suits the soul artist in a literature club. The soul artist in a literature club was an appropriate nickname for Baron. Without hesitating, Joo-ho asked about the things that he wanted to know about Baron. How did you end up joining the literature club? By mistake. Joo-ho tilted his head in confusion and asked, did you get it mixed up with the art club? The end. Chapter 16. The Soul Artist in a Literature Club, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 16. Chapter 16, The Soul Artist in a Literature Club, 2, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. Not quite. I already knew that it was the literature club. I even turned in the application myself. Then, what makes it a mistake? Why do you keep asking? Just applying what Mr. Moon taught us, Joo-ho replied light-heartedly. Of course, he had no intention to dig any further if Baron expressed discomfort. Are you feeling uncomfortable? Joo-ho saw the dry expression on Baron's face. He didn't seem to be uncomfortable or feeling like he was on the spot. Baron let out a short sigh and continued, more like hassled. Especially by you. What did I do? Seeing how Joo-ho was looking intently at him even before getting to the main point, Baron took a brief moment and continued, if you're different, you stick out. It was a rather random answer. And you're alone when you're running away. I had to try several times harder than others because of my color, he added. To not be left out, Joo-ho heard something that Baron hadn't said with his own lips. Baron continued with his story. Wearing a matching uniform wasn't enough. Neither was eating the same food. If you want to blend in, one must see, listen, dislike and like the same things as everyone else. It wasn't much of a challenge to laugh at something that wasn't funny or criticize someone or something that I don't dislike. It was tolerable. At the end of the day, I made friends and my school life became enjoyable. As he finished speaking, Baron scowled. He was revisiting a bad memory. There was a guy. I wasn't close to him, but I knew what he looked like. He was an average Joe, and we ended up in the same class in our third year of middle school. I'm not sure if he was having a hard time adjusting to his new environment, but he was running away from it all before I knew it. On the other hand, I was fine. Honestly, I didn't care about him. There were no issues, and then I graduated. Baron stopped for a brief moment before continuing, his voice cracking slightly, but the other guy didn't. I heard he died. The wind blew. The air was cold. When I heard that, I thought, what is this? Why did this have to happen? Should I have done something? What? How? I kept on thinking after coming up to high school. Before I knew it, a year had already passed. Still, I haven't reached an answer. Meanwhile, Baron told Juho that he thought of a hobby that he'd been forgetting about. I had a sudden realization and bought a sketchbook, but I didn't really feel like joining an art club, let alone drawing by myself. So, I just went for it. However, as you know, things don't usually work out if you jump in with your eyes covered. What didn't work out? Baron scratched his head at Juho's question. With an absent-minded smile, he confessed his mistake. I thought the literature club was one of the lazy clubs. A lazy club, Juho and Seo Kwang thought the same thing at one point. Which means I wasn't planning on being the sole artist in the club. All I wanted to do was draw while surrounded by other people who were busy with their study guides. A so-called lazy club meant any club that utilized their activity time for independent study sessions. Juho imagined Baron drawing by himself in such a club. Compared to the image he portrayed, he seemed rather timid. I tried to pull myself out, but Mr. Moon wouldn't let me, saying that there weren't enough members. Since I had nothing to lose, I confessed to him. I'm not going to write. I'm going to draw. Do you know what he said? What did he say? He said, that's fine too. Baron shook his head as if dumbfounded by what Mr. Moon had said. He really made me stick out like a sore thumb from the first day. I didn't think the timid first years would come after me so proactively. Aha! Now it made sense as to why Baron was in the situation he was in. Baron probably wanted to make up for his past of wanting to be like everyone else. At the same time, he probably wanted to be forgiven. Yet, he had been left alone after all the time that had gone by and everything that took place in between. At the end, he started pushing himself. He consciously tried to swim against the current. He consciously tried to be left alone. Only, the literature club didn't leave him to do that to himself. You've hit the nail right on the head when you mentioned what a student wanted. He wasn't the sole artist in the literature club. He was made so by Mr. Moon and the other members. At some point, Juho had asked everyone why they were trying so hard to get a writing sample from Baron. The answer had been simple, he's the only one in the club we haven't gotten closer to. Juho looked at Baron as he sat still. Behind him stood the biggest tree in the school. It might look lonely, but underneath the dirt, there was a complex network of roots mingling with that of other trees. Although trees don't even move. What are you saying? Over there. Right as Juho was about to explain, a voice came from behind them. Juho turned around to see Baron Girl. That was a surprise. As Juho stared at her, she gave him a light nod. Thanks for the help. Then, she pulled out her hand. There was a loaf of bread in it. It was a piece of sponge cake from the cafeteria, the most expensive item in the shop. Oh, no. You don't have to. Thank you, she repeated. Despite Juho turning down her gift, she remained insistent. When he finally took the bread, she turned around and walked back into the school building. It was a reward that had been completely unexpected. Would you like half? I'm fine. Oh, yeah. That reminds me. Didn't you receive a black plastic bag? That I did. That was from Bomb. Since BOM had been knocked out of the game before Seo Kwon even had time to speak, Juho spread the news for his friend. I figured, Baron answered in a low voice. Baron was confused by the first years coming after him with such gusto. Now, there was another first year in front of him who was well prepared. Juho bit a piece of his sponge cake and said, would you like to make a bet? A bet? Baron asked at the unexpected offer. After swallowing the cake, Juho continued, on whether or not the sponge cake girl makes a friend or not. What? Baron was flustered. It happened because of his classmate who had been randomly called the sponge cake girl. As if it were no big deal, Juho continued, isn't that why you're paying attention to her? Because she's alone. When did I ever pay attention to her? I saw your eyes following her just now. Just as Baron was about to respond in anger, Juho raised his hand and stopped him. Let's make a bet. Let's see if the sponge cake girl makes a friend within a week. A week is kind of pushing it. There were already cliques in every class. Kids with similar interests came together and shared various hobbies. It wasn't an easy task to be part of a group that had already been solidified, let alone within a week. There was no chance. So, let's make the bet. I'm betting that she makes a friend. If I lose, I'll make sure the first years leave you alone. And if you win? A sample of your writing, obviously. Baron hesitated. He was having trouble figuring out that first year calmly munching away at his sponge cake. He thought of the time when Juho's gaze was fixated on him as words flowed out of his lips like water. This is not a trick, is it? I promise that I'll keep myself from interacting with the sponge cake girl in any way. I can write a note as evidence if you want. Baron thought for a moment. A first year who kept on offering him a comic book, a first year who left him a bag full of snacks in secret, a first year who aroused his curiosity, and then a first year who emanated confidence. Fine, Baron answered. The first time Baron realized that he was different from everyone around him was in kindergarten. Baron met kids his age for the first time then. He was excited about kindergarten. Holding his mother's hand, he went into the kindergarten building. There was curiosity in the eyes of the kids looking at Baron. That was when Baron learned what people looked like when they saw something different from what he saw. Some kids moved away while other kids took the initiative to approach him. It wasn't a bad feeling. Baron himself had been curious about other kids his age. He was looking forward to the process of getting to know them. They started talking, and soon, they became friends. One day, a teacher from another class approached Baron's mother. There's been a complaint from a parent regarding a black child. It wasn't hard to guess what the parents were complaining about. These were parents who were anxious about their children being exposed to potentially negative influences. Even as a young boy, Baron was able to understand that. Eventually, Baron left that kindergarten. The next place he went to was an art institute. There were countless colors and people. A college student wearing red shoes, a housewife with a blue grocery bag, a corporate worker wearing a navy blue tie, an elementary school student with a yellow hairband. They were all different from each other in occupation, age and appearance. Baron grew closer to those people. He enjoyed that he got to draw and paint with different people. It wasn't until recently that he revisited what that felt like. Literature club. There were countless words and first years with diverse personalities. Baron thought of Juho. He was an interesting one. The moment he looked into Juho's world, Baron was not the same as he used to be. Countless words came out of Juho's lips as he simply stared into Baron. Baron was intimidated by that strange sensation. He thought and he changed. Being alone made one stick out. The only person who stuck out was Baron himself. It was his dark skin that made him stick out like a sore thumb. That was the only thing that separated him from others, but Juho didn't have to force himself around it. He took the book in his hand and brushed it across with his other hand. There was a drawing of a bird. The trace of a bird. It was a book at the height of its popularity. At any bookstore, that was the best-selling book. It was always being displayed at the most visible spot. Frankly, Baron had bought the book with the intention of mocking the author. Although the world claimed him to be a genius, Baron thought that it would be no more than some high school composition about shallow emotions. The public worshipped him, and Baron had been disgusted by it. It was shocking. It was a shock indeed. Yunwoo's book dug relentlessly into its reader's mind. How is this possible? What's worse is that he's even a year younger than I am. Why am I being affected by this stupid book so much, thought Baron. He finished the book in no time. The moment he closed the book, Baron felt something hot in his chest. He had never shed a tear from reading a book. To Baron, that tear felt all the more foreign. Even when he heard the news about the passing of his friend in middle school, Baron didn't respond with tears. Still, he cried. Then, he felt refreshed. After calming his heart, he opened the book once again. Baron stopped in his tracks on the eye-catching cover. There were two sparrows sitting on a thick, gray telephone pole. Although it was a common sight, Baron found it to be awkward for some reason. If I end up writing. I want to write a story of a little sparrow that goes in search for a tree to sit on. For the birds that are tired of sitting on a telephone pole, I'll make a tree for them to rest on. I'll plant a sturdy tree filled with many branches. Of course, it was always, if. Baron continued on his way. Then, he thought, it would have been fun to have that average Joe in the club. The end. Chapter 17. The Sole Artist in a Literature Club, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 17. Chapter 17, The Sole Artist in a Literature Club, 3, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudi Owl. I guess we all failed, Seo Kwang said with a sigh. It had been exactly a week since Juho had made the bet with Baron. That meant that the tug-o-war between Baron and the first years would come to an end by the end of that day. There's still some time left. It's already over at this point, Seo Kwang announced, resting his chin on his hand on Juho's desk. Juho looked around. There were students on cleaning duty cleaning the classroom. It was time for club activities. There was no hope. Despite involving the entire club in that situation, Juho sat peacefully, and Seo Kwang stared at him. What were you thinking when you made that bet? It was half on impulse. Juho knew that Baron was interested in Sponge Cake Girl. From afar, she was alone. She was also introverted, yet ordinary. When Juho talked to her for the first time, he had simply been thinking out loud. Seo Kwang looked at him in disbelief. So, you're telling me that this mischief of yours was on impulse. In the future, don't ever get yourself into gambling. What do you mean, mischief? That's exactly what this is. You put your fate in the hands of a second-year whose name you don't even know. On top of that, you got everyone else in the club involved. I suppose it is my bad that I didn't discuss this with others. Seo Kwang smacked his lips at Juho's apology. Then, he shook his head. Well, there wasn't going to be another chance if you failed anyway. He doesn't come across as the type who would give in to somebody pestering him, especially after already saying, no, I agree. That's why I went all in, you're shameless. Juho laughed light-heartedly at Xiao Kuang's criticism, and Xiao Kuang stared at him for a while and asked quite seriously, "What would you do if it didn't work out?" If Juho's plan failed, then bridging the gap between Baron and the rest of the club members would be much more difficult. Mr. Moon had blatantly given them a chance to connect. If they didn't seize that blatant chance, then what followed would be blatant failure. Things would be even more awkward between him and the rest of us. That's what I'm saying. You couldn't have jumped in blindfolded. Juho felt bad for Xiao Kuang, but he hadn't planned for the possible failure. That was what it looked like to be impulsive. At Juho's silence, Xiao Kuang's expression grew darker. What to do? Juho had experienced countless failures up to the point of being homeless. He was sick of failing at something and he had no intention of reliving such a life. That was the reason why he was pushing ahead with his impulse. You can't do anything if you're afraid of the results. There is no way to know the result of something until it reveals itself. That was especially true when it came to changing a person's heart. No matter how much one measured and calculated, they would never reach the answer. That was what made waiting such a nerve-wracking event. Nothing was certain. I can think of a plan after I fail. Juho was certain that there was going to be a way. There was nothing to get out of worrying from that point on. The plan hadn't failed yet. Besides, he had a good feeling about it. It'll work out, he kept repeating to himself. Xiao Kuang sneered at him, whatever. You owe me bread from the canteen if you fail. I'll buy you a loaf of sponge cake. The two stood up from their seats to head over to the science room. As they were on their way out through the back door, they found Baron standing in front of it. Come out for a second. At his deep, resounding voice, the students on cleaning duty stopped what they were doing. It wasn't common for Baron to be seen on the first year's floor. He had never come down voluntarily to see a first year, until now. Xiao Kuang pushed Juho from behind. It seemed like he wanted Juho to find out what was going on. What brings you here? Why else would I be here aside from that one thing? Baron was referring to the bet. I'm guessing the result is out. How'd it go? Who won? Xiao Kuang asked, but Baron didn't answer. It seemed like he needed to discuss it privately, so Juho sent Xiao Kuang ahead to the science room. Take your time. Okay. Xiao Kuang waved, and then Baron went out to the hallway with Juho following him. They remained silent until sitting under the same tree from the day before. Baron asked calmly, how did you know? It was somewhat of a random question, but Juho understood the gist of what he was trying to ask. I had a good feeling about it, thought Juho. Then, he exclaimed with a smile, the sponge cake girl must have made a friend. I asked how did you know? Baron thought about what had happened 3 days before. The sponge cake girl had been talking with a group of people. The next day, and the following day, she was surrounded by people. She seemed happy, laughing and chattering with her friends. It took less than a week. Just as Juho had said, she had moved on from solitude. Then, there was Baron himself, remaining unfazed by it all. You knew it was going to happen too, Baron. Baron didn't say a word, and Juho continued, I saw her holding a book when I saw her on the second-floor hallway. The Trace of a Bird. It's a recent best-seller. Baron hesitated at the familiar title. Sponge Cake Girl has a very introverted personality. Talking to someone first is not an easy task for her. In that case, somebody needs to approach her and talk to her. She had things to talk about all along. It was in her hand. Juho thought of the sponge cake he had eaten on the same spot where he was sitting. She had come to show gratitude to a first year who she hardly knew, even with a small gift. Usually, one would think of a reason to move on. I appreciate the help, but I don't know his class. I don't know his name. He's in a different grade, so I probably won't ever run into him again. It was a connection that could have been easily neglected. On top of that, she was an introvert. It couldn't have been easy to talk to someone who she didn't know. Despite it all, she had brought Juho the sponge cake. It wasn't likely that a person like that would be left alone. Besides, she had been involved in the drama that had attracted the attention of an entire class and proven innocent. It wouldn't have been weird to be approached by at least one person. What she needs is something to talk about. Then, there was silence, and Baron let out a smirk. That was disappointing. There was emptiness in his tone. It was an emptiness that came from acknowledgement. Baron, too, had been keeping his eyes on Sponge Cake Girl. He must have known better than any other person that being a loner didn't suit her. He seemed like he was thinking of someone when Juho said, "If you're alive, you can make it out." That's what being alone was like. A person couldn't live on his own. As long as he was alive, somebody was bound to come by. At that moment, they saw the Sponge Cake Girl coming out of the school building with 3 other girls. Juho called her as he waved. The cake was delicious. Right. She was smiling brightly and actually responding to him talking to her. She had come looking for him after he helped her, and now she wasn't alone. "I should have tried to talk to her," said Baron. "I wish I had said something to that average Joe. He might have been able to last just a little longer. A person couldn't survive on his own." Baron bit his lips. "It's not your fault, Baron," Juho whispered. By the time Juho and Baron were the only people left in the yard, the bell rang throughout the entire school. They headed to the science room. Baron still gave off a brusque impression, but he looked a bit more comfortable. Without saying anything to each other, the two walked up the stairs and went into the science room. "Baron." "What?" Baron answered tiredly. Ignoring his exhaustion, Sunwa continued, "I forfeit." "What? What is she saying?" Baron seemed dumbfounded. Next to him, Juho also tilted his head in confusion. It wasn't like Sunwa to bring up forfeiting. Juho thought about explaining the situation to her, but Sunwa seemed like she still had things to say. She picked up a comic book. It was the same comic book she had been desperately trying to get Baron to read. She pointed to Baron with the comic book and said, "It's too late to ask if you can borrow it. Even if you're desperate to write a report on it, it's not going to work." "I'm not interested." At Baron's blunt answer, she stepped aside. There was a pile of comic books that were hidden behind her. "What is all this?" With a satisfied smile on her face, she presented her collection. As she explained each of her comic books with excitement, Baron asked her again, "So what? Let's read them together." "I thought you said you forfeit." She shook her head at his response. "These are only suggestions. I want to share this passion of mine." Baron hesitated. He couldn't think straight. Recognizing his hesitation, Juho replied, "I want to read them too." Her eyes lit up, and she smiled brightly. "I knew you'd understand. Comic books are even better when you read it with other people." "Then, count me in," Seo Kwang chimed in. "Not a chance," she replied ruthlessly. "That's not nice." "Then, what about that one? You don't need it anymore." While Seo Kwang and Sunwa quarreled over a comic book, Juho took a book from the top of the pike and handed it to Baron. At Juho's gesture, Baron couldn't help but smile. Then, he pulled out the black plastic bag, full of snacks. "Here, have a snack." "Oh, wow. You really know how to impress us." "This bag looks familiar though. Somebody left it on my desk." While Baum sat nervously, Baron opened up several packs of snacks and spread them out onto the desk. It was a party. Everyone held a comic book in their hands while munching on the snacks. Reading comic books and snickering together was truly a fun experience. "I didn't know this was the comic book club." Mr. Moon. Mr. Moon came in and looked around the room. The literature club had turned into a comic book store. Then, he snatched one of the snacks from the desk and put it in his mouth. "Hand me a comic book, will you?" Eventually, the entire club was immersed in comic books. "Yo, you missed a spot." As Juho leaned forward in his seat, a voice sounded above his head. It was obvious who the voice belonged to. "You mean here?" Pretending not to understand, Juho took a broom and swept across Seo Kwang's feet. There were chunks of hair and dust stuck on the end of the broom. It clearly wasn't well maintained. Seo Kwang jumped up and stepped back. Juho was in the middle of cleaning the classroom. The cleaning rotation was based on the call number. There were 3 others on duty aside from him. 2 of them swept the classroom with him, and the other was mopping the hallway. After sweeping for some time, Juho straightened his back. There was no painful groan. It was a blessing to have a young body. After checking for dust on his shoes, Seo Kwang leaned against a desk. Naturally, he opened the book in his hand and started reading. He had a habit of reading whenever there was a chance to. Juho himself was an avid reader, but it was nothing like Seo Kwang. He's an interesting fellow, he thought. The end. Chapter 18. Yun Woo is in our school. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 18. Chapter 18. Yun Woo is in our school. 1. Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiaol. Juho wrapped up the cleaning and went out to the hallway to throw out the trash. There used to be a trash can in each classroom, but being that it was hard to maintain, they were removed by the school. Instead, the students were to use a community trash can at the end of the hallway. Standing at the front of the trash can, Juho began separating the recyclables from his trash. A pen missing its lid, an eraser about to break in half, the crumpled up school newsletter, small pieces of paper, etc. They were all found on the classroom's floor. What's this? After he had finished separating the recyclables, there was another piece of paper lying on the hallway floor that caught his eyes. It must have fallen out of Juho's trash. Judging from the torn pages and crumpled up surface, it looked like it was treated roughly. When he saw the neat writing on the paper, he picked it up. This. Juho was shocked. He was familiar with what was written on the crumpled up paper. Is this a transcription? It was part of a transcription of the book Juho had written. The neat penmanship abruptly came to an end. Who wrote this, thought Juho. Transcriptions were something Juho had been working on himself. It was part of the daily routine of the literature club. The purpose of it was to become a better writer. Could this belong to someone who aspires to be a writer? Then there must have been better books. Why did this person choose The Trace of a Bird, of all books? Juho was having trouble understanding the motive of the transcriber. Besides, did it mean something that Juho had found it next to a trash can? Seeing the homeroom teacher from a distance, Juho shoved in the crumpled up paper into his pocket and finished cleaning. How boring. It was the math class. The teacher, with his lower belly bulging out, had a simple teaching method. He wrote out the equations and the process on how to solve them. Then, as a final touch, he added a short and quick explanation to what was written on the chalkboard. The math teacher was surprisingly popular among the students. It wasn't because of his friendliness or his appearance, but because of his writing and equations. With his pinky finger sticking up while using the white chalk, his handwriting was neat and consistent. His craft reached its climax when he started drawing figures on the board. His drawings were comparable to those of an art teacher. They were steady and three-dimensional. What was funny was that even the teacher himself found satisfaction in his craft on the chalkboard. After class, on his way out, he looked at what he had written and drawn and smiled in a way that he never would to his students. For some reason, Juho thought of Mr. Moon. It felt like he had figured out why the math teacher was able to come to school so consistently. While Juho was spending time looking at the chalkboard, he noticed a disturbance in the class. When he looked around, he saw a small piece of paper being passed around. They were exchanging notes. Usually, he would have ignored it, but that time was different. There was a much bigger number of people exchanging notes with one another. It wasn't just a note between two individuals. Rather, it was a note being passed around to the entire class. It seemed more like a telegram than a note at that point, and Juho became curious. What's written on that paper that has to be passed around in the middle of class? Eventually, the note reached Seo Kwang. He seemed confused about getting the note since he was reading his book on the down low, but soon, he opened it to read it. Juho stared intently at his back. His shoulders started moving up and down. Seo Kwang was quite shaken. He took his eyes off the note and looked around at his surroundings. It seemed like he was trying to find some sort of confirmation. Whenever his face passed by Juho, he could see the shock in Seo Kwang's face. What was going on? Juho tried to remember if anything had happened around that time of his life, but nothing came to him. After Seo Kwang had his moment, he quietly turned around to Juho and handed him the note. After anticipating reading it, Juho took the note without delay. For some reason, the paper was getting floppy. It must have been passed around the entire class. The moment Juho opened the floppy piece of paper, he had to stop himself from gasping out loud. The paper was filled with small letters. It read, "Yun-woo is in our school. Is my cover blown?" It doesn't really seem like it, thought Juho. There wasn't much he could do in that difficult understand situation. For that reason, Juho stared out the window absent-mindedly until the math teacher left the classroom with a satisfied smile. "Hey," Seo Kwang called, quickly turning to Juho as soon the class ended. With a slight determination, Juho answered, "What?" Seo Kwang responded with a serious face, "Let's go." "Go? Where?" "Where?" "To meet Yun-woo." "What?" Juho was still confused. "Where can anyone go to find Yun-woo? He's sitting right in front of you. What's happening? Let's hurry." The others went ahead. "Where are we going? What were you doing during class when the note was being passed around?" "Come on, I've heard she's in classroom 7. "I was paying attention to the lesson, of course," Juho said, although he was actually spacing out then. As he caught up to Seo Kwang hurrying his steps, Juho was slowly came to grasp things. "That must mean there's another Yun-woo in this school aside from myself. In classroom 7 at that. Could it be a case of identity theft?" "What did you say?" "Nothing." Seo Kwang exclaimed with excitement, "It's just as I thought, a girl." "Who? What do you mean who?" "Yun-woo, obviously." "What? Yun-woo's a she." "Yeah, she must be really pretty." "No, Yun-woo is not a girl." No matter how much Juho screamed it on the inside, Seo Kwang couldn't hear him. As much as Seo Kwang was excited about Yun-woo being a beautiful girl, it was merely an information regarding a case of identity theft to Juho's ears. In the front of classroom 7, there was a crowd of people who had come to see Yun-woo after hearing the rumor. Seo Kwang and Juho made their way through the crowd into the classroom. Inside, was another crowd surrounding a girl in a large circle. It was obvious that she was the thief who had stolen the name Yun-woo. When the two got closer to her, she was busy answering questions from other students. "How did you think of writing something like that? You know, there are a lot of people who are scared of pigeons lately. I was on the street one day and I heard a lady screaming. I thought she was in trouble, so I went to her, and sure enough, it was because of a pigeon. I've seen people do that." Me too, me too. I saw this mom who was covering her daughter's mouth when some pigeons were flying away because they're dirty. It makes sense though. They do kind of look harmful even at a glance. Pigeons. Juho was dumbfounded. As soon as the fake Yunwoo finished, other students surrounding her began to chime in. After seeing that, I had an idea. I thought it'd be interesting to make the protagonist a person who suffers from a phobia of birds. I see. What's the secret to writing well? She was coming up with stories that could likely exist. Another question came out of the circle of people surrounding the girl. With a smirk, she answered sincerely. The mole on her cheek moved up as she smiled. How should I say this? I just let my hand do the work. You close your eyes, and think of an image, things you want to write about. Then, your hand will move on its own. Wow! How long did it take you to write the entire book? The first draft didn't take long to finish. Maybe a week. Juho clenched his fist from embarrassment. Why am I feeling embarrassed? What kind of nonsense is she saying about her hand moving on its own? How do you write with your eyes closed? 1 week. Where did that come from? The Trace of a Bird is nearly a full-length novel. 1 week is nowhere near enough. What's this about? As Juho shook in agony, another person raised his hand to ask another question. The way your book described fear or terror was incredibly realistic. A lot of people are saying that it's based on experience. I'm sorry. That's a bit of a sensitive question. I'm not sure if I can answer it. Who does she think she is? Does she have no shame? Well, I suppose she couldn't have guessed that the real Yunwoo came to this school. She must be acting because she's not aware that she's being watched by the real Yunwoo. That had never happened when Juho had revealed his face in the past. Yet, it was still somewhat of a familiar sight. Conversely, at that time, Juho had been the one surrounded by the crowd. Juho had spent his days in school being in the center of attention. At times, students from other schools would come visit him to find out if the rumor was true. He couldn't help but notice himself in that imposter. Still, her bluffs were getting out of hand. That was kind of unexpected. At that moment, Juho heard his friends murmur. There was a contrast in his voice from a moment ago. Yunwoo must have been quite different from what Seo Kwang had imagined. Juho looked at him and asked, what kind of person were you hoping Yunwoo to be? Well, if you put it that way, it makes it harder for me to answer. I guess pretty. After some hesitation, he eventually answered with a joke, and Juho laughed it off without asking any further. Juho felt a little better. He looked at Yunwoo, who was the center of attention. The mole on her cheek was moving about on her face whenever she smiled. With his eyes on the girl, Juho's lips parted. Can I ask a question too? Yunwoo nodded and accepted Juho's request. There was confidence in her face as if she could answer anything. To tackle the most fundamental curiosity he had, Juho asked, you've been anonymous up to this point. Why reveal yourself now? Everyone had been friendly to her so far. At that point, there was no use in asking her to prove that she was real. For that reason, Juho decided to take a roundabout approach. He didn't show her any hostility. Rather, he asked as if he was genuinely curious. She seemed caught off guard for a moment, but soon, she straightened her face and answered Juho's question, I'm a little flustered myself. I didn't think my cover would get blown like this. One of my friends saw the original copy of my book. I didn't want to be a liar. The original copy, she says. Juho reached into his pocket, and his hand caught something. A worn-out piece of paper rustled in his hand. Although he had no basis for it, Juho felt confident. This is from her. Juho slowly pulled his hand out of his pocket. I see. You don't like to lie. Yes, you have a rough future ahead of you, Juho said to her as the sole person who knew the conclusion Yunwoo had come to. There was no benefit in borrowing that name. Having misunderstood him, she smiled innocently and said, I think it's better than being a hypocrite. If you're uncomfortable at heart, you can't write well. Wow. That's amazing. Juho thought for a moment and made her a final question. There were other students to his sides who were itching to ask her questions themselves. How does it feel to be Yunwoo? She smiled brightly and replied, great. The end. Chapter 19. Yunwoo is in our school, too. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 19. Chapter 19, Yunwoo is in our school, too. Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiaol. What do you think, Mr. Moon? Sun Hwa asked. What do you mean? Mr. Moon asked in response as he took his seat. Sun Hwa shed some light on the latest hot topic in school. As in Yunwoo. What about him? Mr. Moon seemed to have no clue of why that name was coming up. Having assumed that Mr. Moon would already know about the matter, Sun Hwa asked again in surprise. Do the teachers not know about this yet? What are you talking about? I'm talking about Yunwoo. Who doesn't know Yunwoo? Mr. Moon genuinely didn't seem to be aware that the renowned celebrity was in his class. Right as Sun Hwa was about to reveal the truth, Juho intervened. Yunwoo comes to our school. What? What the? I was going to say that. Juho swiftly avoided Sun Hwa's fierce glare at him, but Mr. Moon was sitting still in shock. Though he was hardly startled by anything, he was frozen in place by what he had just heard. That moment, another person stood up from his seat in disbelief. It was Baron. The two hardest people to surprise, sitting across from each other, staring out. It was quite a sight. As for Baron, he had no friends in his class who would share the news with him. It would make sense that he hadn't known until then. Judging from their reactions, it seemed like the rumor was yet to spread throughout the entire school. With a smile, Seo Kwang asked Baron, you didn't know Baron? I saw some third years coming by. Yunwoo is in this school. Yeah. She's in class 7. She's pretty. Yunwoo is a girl. I know. What Hong Sam said in his blog is right. Baron and Seo Kwang began to have a deep conversation about Hong Sam. Hong Sam was a famous blogger who believed Yunwoo was female. Having heard about Hong Sam earlier, Juho visited his blog one day. Along with his ridiculous opinion on Yunwoo's true identity, there were also reviews of books across various genres. Unlike Juho's expectation, there were quite a few regulars who visited his blog. Hong Sam seemed quite humorous and skilled in identifying the core message of a book. There was not a moment of boredom. Even Juho purchased a book at some point after having read his blog, so that proved it. Listening to Baron and Seo Kwang's conversation, Juho quietly nodded. Ignoring the boys, Sun Hwa continued with her story about Yunwoo for Mr. Moon. She sounded like an artist when she talked. Apparently, once she closes her eyes and feels her inspiration, her hand writes on its own. Isn't that fascinating? I'm telling you, she's a genius. She was surrounded by other students the entire day. Even so, she answered every question without showing any sign of fatigue. Mr. Moon groaned vaguely at Sun Hwa's and Bomb's words. His expression was similar to Seo Kwang's when he had gone over to seek Yunwoo. Why wouldn't Yunwoo join the literature club? She's a novelist, Sun Hwa said. Then, Juho replied, well, just because someone is a novelist doesn't mean that person has to be a part of the literature club. Maybe Yunwoo wants to experience other things because she's already a novelist. I guess so. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable if Yunwoo was part of the club. How so? Isn't it obvious? It's shameful to try to write something in front of a professional. Besides, we're the same age. After a brief silence, Juho's mouth opened, shameful. Well, it's just embarrassing. It's like holding a candle to the sun. Is that right? Alright, enough chit-chat. Mr. Moon clapped his hands and calmed the excitement. For a while, the literature club had been focusing on improving vocabulary and transcription. The members had been harvesting words from the sea, land, their respective homes, and streets. We're going to be using our bodies today, so let's move the desks. They acted according to Mr. Moon's instruction. They separated the two rectangular desks that were next to each other and lined them up into a single row. The 5 sat on one side of a desk while Mr. Moon remained on the other side on his own. It looked like Mr. Moon was being interviewed for a job. He took out a notebook he had brought with him and continued with his instructions. In this notebook, you will find various words. One person has to explain the word I show him or her, and the rest of you have to guess. Is this a quiz? Juho had seen another quiz of a similar format on the TV, so Mr. Moon explained the difference between that class and the TV show. There is no time limit. Make sure you focus more on explaining than guessing the correct answer. We have a lot of time, so take your time observing your surroundings. Explain as if you were listing the characteristics of the object. You'll get it as we go on. It was still confusing. Seo Kwang was called first because he was sitting on the left-most side of the desk. Since Mr. Moon said that everyone would have a turn, Juho was made last. Mr. Moon stood behind the members who were sitting and revealed the word on his notebook to Seo Kwang. It really felt like the speed quiz on TV. Seo Kwang hesitated for a brief moment when he saw the word, but soon stammered his way through. Although there was no time limit, he started speaking faster and faster. So this. It's an image of a city. The first thing that comes to mind when you think of a city. Fanciness. Bright lights. Sun Hwa was blurting out whatever she could think of, but Seo Kwang shook his head. It's far from fanciness. Opposite, in fact. It melts under heat. Also, it cracks when it gets old. Most things melt under heat and crack with age. Ignoring Juho, Seo Kwang continued, in literature, they use this word to portray something bad about a city. Gray. It's gray, it's used in construction, and you can find them in residential areas. They use this for building streets, and if you fall on it, you'll hurt your knee. Maybe it's usually mixed with a few other things. It's gray. It was still unclear what Seo Kwang was describing. Still, everyone had an idea. Sun Hwa exclaimed, concrete. Correct. Everyone turned around and found the word cement concrete written on Mr. Moon's notebook. In parenthesis it was also written, concrete counts as an answer. Maybe. Why'd you say maybe? Hey, it's not like I'm studying architecture. How much would I know about concrete? Even then, you shouldn't say something if it's not a fact. You try it. At that, Sun Hwa walked out confidently to the front. She looked intently past the other club members in their seats and then at the notebook. For a brief moment, she was lost in her thoughts. In the meantime, Juho saw an artist sitting toward the middle of the desk, recording the activity of the literature club members. His hand moved about his sketchbook. As Juho watched, Sun Hwa began her explanation, okay. So, this is something that comes out during important scenes. There's a song about it too. It looks prettier from afar. You don't look that pretty even from afar, so it can't be you. I'm going to hurt you. Sun Hwa raised her fist at Seo Kwang as he mocked her. At Bomb's awkward laughter because of them, Sun Hwa continued, it's season-sensitive. Each has its own place, but some don't. And there's a lot of them. It's not visible during the day, but only at night. Oh, him. It has something to do with his name. Then, Sun Hwa pointed fiercely at Juho. All eyes were fixed on him as she pointed out suddenly. Juho. Woo, Juho, TL note. Wooju sounds like the Korean word for space. Mozart really liked this. Oh, stars. Correct. Seo Kwang got it right this time. I guess space does have something to do with it, Juho admitted to himself while thinking about his name. Then, he proceeded to ask a question. Mozart likes stars. He composed music about it. Wouldn't you think he did? Juho stopped himself from acting on his urge to ask, what makes that assumption so different from Xiao Kuang's? Next, was Boem. She seemed nervous to be standing in front of the others. You got this. Sun Hua cheered for her while shaking her arms. Xiao Kuang joined in by shaking his hand at her. Juho, too, clapped gently as a means of encouragement. As soon as she saw her word, Boom started talking. It's delicious. It's usually for dessert and everyone sits around it. And some don't have seeds. Watermelon. At seedless, Sun Hua had thought of watermelon, but it wasn't the right answer. Boem gently waved her hand in denial and continued. You can get drunk from it if you drink it. It can be made into candy or a poem. You don't eat the peel or the seeds. You don't eat the peel. Is it an orange? Really? You get drunk from drinking an orange. As Xiao Kuang and Sun Hua quarreled, Juho quietly raised his hand. His answer may have been somewhat subjective, but he immediately understood from one of the clues. You can get drunk from it if you drink it. Grapes. That's correct. I was thinking the same thing. Xiao Kuang exclaimed. Then, he critiqued one of Bomb's clues. I eat every part of the grape, even the peel and the seeds. What for? Sun Hua questioned him in response. With an apologetic expression, Boem told him, I don't eat the peel or the seeds, so I just said it without thinking. Well, I guess that makes sense. There's not even a time limit, but this is so nerve-wracking. So far, every person had shown a tendency of talking or trying to talk faster. Everyone was getting anxious because they felt like they were competing in a quiz show. I guess I'm next, Juho said as he stood up from his seat. From the front, he faced Mr. Moon holding his notebook. It really was like a quiz show. Juho's eyes met with Mr. Moon's. Without hesitating, he turned the page. The word snake was written on the notebook, and he took a moment to think. Snake, snake. Juho immediately thought of the snake wine, but quickly moved on to a different image. He wasn't old enough to be thinking about such a thing. This has no fins, wings, or legs, but it lives in both the water and the desert. It's known to be poisonous. It's very seductive, but even if you give in to its charm, you won't end up taking off your clothes. That's so suggestive. Having shouted such a thing, Xiao Kuang was left with no choice but to face Sun Hua and her pitiful glare. It signifies wisdom and medicine, and it has hundreds of ribs. It's the only reptile among 12 animals, and it won 6th place in Kyungju. That was more than enough, and the three answered simultaneously, snake. Correct, Juho told everyone. Then, he quietly returned to his seat. Looking at him, Xiao Kuang thought to himself, he's good. Having been training his vocabulary so far, Xiao Kuang could only acknowledge the skill Juho possessed. Juho excelled in language. Sun Hua and Boem were both competent, but Juho was on a different level. He had the cognitive skills, but there was something about him that set him apart. At that moment, Boem asked Xiao Kuang, I've been thinking this since last week, but doesn't Juho speak really comfortably? Yeah. Xiao Kuang agreed with her enthusiastically, and Boem was slightly taken aback by such passionate response. We're running out of breath as is, but there's no hesitation in his speech. That's not fair. Sun Hua and Xiao Kuang glared at Juho. Even if they were to complain, he had nothing to say in response. He stared into the ceiling and, choosing to mumble through his words, he said, maybe it's because I like snake wine. The end. Chapter 20. Yun Wu is in our school. 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 20. Chapter 20. Yun Wu is in our school. 3. Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. As time passed, the rumor about Yun-woo spread widely. Countless people, regardless of their year, had been coming in and out of Class 7, and Yun-woo was always in the middle of a crowd. Everyone's attention was on her. Even in places where she wasn't physically present, there were always people talking of Yun-woo, and it was no different in Juho's class. I told my mom, but she wouldn't believe me. I told her that the entire school knows about it, but she just completely made a fool out of me. Really? My sister gave me her book to get it autographed. I got myself a fried chicken dinner out of that deal. Lucky. I was going to take a picture of her, but she said no. She wouldn't let you take a picture. I didn't turn in my phone so I could take a picture of her later. I don't know. In some sense, that massive level of attention toward Yun-woo was a natural response. Yun-woo was an author who had the record of being both the youngest to win the publishing contest and debut into the literary world. Once an anonymous genius revealed his or her identity, people were bound to want to see them in person, even from afar. That girl was within a reachable proximity of her fans, who were also her fellow students. It made sense that she was receiving so much attention. The hallway was busier than ever. Juho looked out and saw that Yun-woo was standing in the middle of it. There were enough students to keep them from passing through. Several students started complaining, but nobody was listening to them. That was not good. Yun. Please give me an autograph. A male student ran out into the hallway in the middle of chatting with his friends next to Juho. Everyone was trying to get an autograph from her. Some even pulled out their fresh, barely read copy of The Trace of a Bird. It was obvious that they hadn't read the book. Those students were trying to get an autograph from the supposed author without having read the book themselves, which was also a common sight and type of student. Me too. Me too. Juho approached the crowd of people clogging up the hallway. How would this imposter handle my demand for an autograph? Would she actually sign it? As if she were mocking him, Yun-woo took out a pen from her pocket and asked another student, "Where do you want me to sign?" "Here, next to the title." "Name." Juho snickered. He must have been underestimating that fake Yun-woo. Haha. Oh, my. He gave up on her shameless attitude. The hallway quickly turned into a signing event for the fans, and Juho started to get worried. What if she really believes herself to be the real Yun-woo? Are you waiting for an autograph too? Seo Kwang came up to him and asked. Juho shook his head. I don't even own a copy. What about you? You own 3. Nah, there are just too many people. To Juho, Seo Kwang wasn't somebody who would miss an opportunity like that for such a simple reason. He stared at his friend for a while and asked, "Are you doubting that she's real?" Seo Kwang seemed uncomfortable with Juho's bluntness. Like Juho had said, he had doubts. That Yun-woo, now the center of attention, was beautiful and just like how he imagined her to be, but something wasn't right. Maybe. Something tells me that it's not her. What makes you say that? That's why I'm keeping quiet. There was frustration in his tone, and seeing Juho smiling, Seo Kwang asked, "What do you think?" "Oh. Hey, guys." The moment Seo Kwang asked him, the two heard a familiar voice calling for them. When they turned their heads, they saw Bom standing behind them. She had a book in her hand. "You're getting it signed?" Juho asked with a surprised look, and Bom blinked rapidly from embarrassment. "It's just that. I really enjoyed the book." There's nothing wrong with that," Juho moved aside as he responded light-heartedly. However, instead of walking past them, Bom stopped and looked at Juho and Seo Kwang. Then she asked, "Are you guys not getting one?" "Yeah, I don't own a copy. I don't think I can dare get through that crowd." There was a wall of people in the direction where Seo Kwang had pointed. It was a wall that separated Juho from Yun-woo. Bom hesitated for a moment and soon shook her head. I don't think I can either. I'll pass. Ha. Are you sure? I can help if you need it. It's okay. I'm not necessarily a fan of the author, Bom said as she embraced her book. At her response, Seo Kwang approached her with a bright smile. That's unexpected. I thought you wouldn't be into novels because you only read comic books with Sun Hwa. What are you reading? What genre? What did you read most recently? Do you have a favorite author? Do you prefer foreign novels or Korean novels? Bom was getting overwhelmed by the barrage of questions, but soon stammered her way through. Finding the sight amusing, Juho watched them. Because of her timid personality and the fact that she was mostly around Sun Hwa, there were hardly any opportunities to strike a direct conversation with her. I don't read a whole lot, but I do have a few that I really like. Aha. So you're the type who reads a book over and over once you get really into it. That's good too. Seo Kwang nodded enthusiastically. He and Bom seemed to be talking casually at first, but now, he was pushing for his one-sided book suggestions. Seeing how Bom didn't seem annoyed by it, Juho didn't do anything to stop his friend. Seo Kwang had a tactful personality himself, so he would have stopped if Bom looked uncomfortable. Juho redirected his attention to Yunwoo. A girl was asking for an autograph. Could you write something next to your signature too? You want me to write something? Yeah, like a special note. It would bump up the value of the book. Yunwoo had been signing with a smile on her face so far, but for the first time, there was a change in her expression. It was subtle, but it was clearly noticeable to him. The girl who requested for a special note began to grow impatient and hurried Yunwoo. Then, Yunwoo quickly changed her tone and responded angrily, "What's a book to you?" Ha! If the value of a book is determined by the signature of a celebrity author or a special note, then my writing has no purpose. A book is precious on its own. The hallway grew quieter. There were sounds of people whispering. The girl who made the special request was flushing from being humiliated in front of the crowd, but Yunwoo pushed on, "You're planning on selling this on the internet, aren't you? I'm offended that you're asking for a special favor without even telling me your name. What are you talking about?" Although the girl was denying it, Yunwoo kept a stern look. As for the crowd who had been watching, it was obvious whose side they were going to take. Nobody wanted to be enemies with a person who had something to offer, especially when there was something to be gained from that person. Besides, it was already suspicious enough that the girl wasn't giving her name. To Juho, however, there was little to no difference between those two girls. A purpose to write. Only a person who actually writes can make that statement convincing. Lunchtime came, and everyone rushed toward the cafeteria. The sound of rumbling footsteps resounded in the hallway. Usually, Juho and Seo Kwang would head over to the cafeteria after the crowd had passed their classroom, but that day was different. There was a place to be. Juho stood up from his seat. Since he had already given Seo Kwang a notice, Seo Kwang went onto the cafeteria along all the other students. He had a skill of getting along with just about anyone. However, outside of a certain group, he didn't mention anything about books. After all, a book-loving high-school student was a rare find. Juho opened the door and walked into class 7. Just like he had done in the past, Yunwoo was sitting alone in the classroom. It had been the only time of the day that Juho had gotten to be alone. "Are you alone?" "Yes," Yunwoo replied gently. Intentionally, Juho responded with a mean attitude, "Nothing's more important than food. No matter how big of a fan," he thought. "Why are you here?" she asked. There was a subtle edge in her tone, and Juho stood next to her seat. Yunwoo looked up to him and asked again, "Are you here to see me?" Juho nodded lightly. "I'm here to meet Yunwoo." "Why?" "I have something to give you." "I guess Yunwoo came before food in your mind." Juho responded calmly, I already ate, although it was bread instead of rice. Yunwoo frowned at him and then changed the subject, so, what is it that you wanted to give me? Actually, I have something to tell you before that. As if she had been expecting it, she looked intently at him, and Juho continued without hesitation, I think you should be mindful of giving autographs in the hallway. What? Yunwoo asked. It wasn't what she had expected. It makes it difficult for others to pass through if there's a crowd of people blocking the way. I think you need to be mindful of that. Yunwoo spaced out for a moment, but she soon came to her senses and responded, I see. You're right. I didn't think about that. I'll be careful from now on. Oh, this is something I heard from another person. Is it true that you're close to other famous authors? After circulating through the school for a while, the rumors she had started eventually reached him. One of them was that Yunwoo let her fans talk on the phone with other authors. Yes, it's true. Why, do you have an author you like? Of course. As ordinary as I am, I'm part of the literature club. Ah, you're in the literature club. So who do you like? She appeared confident. If I tell you, would you let me talk to the author on the phone? If I know the person. But being an author is an incredibly busy job, so I hope you know that they might not be able to answer. Of course, Juho understood her attitude. It was such a cop-out answer. That's fine then. I don't want to bother someone when they're busy either. Thanks for understanding. He decided to ask her one more question before handing her what he had brought. He personally wanted to hear her answer while the real Yunwoo came face to face with the imposter. There could be something worth noting, so he listened carefully. How are you planning on writing the sequel? A sequel. She seemed confused by the seemingly random question about a sequel. The book hadn't even been out that long. As usual, however, she gave an adequate answer, I'm not sure yet. I do have a few ideas in mind. What are they? That's it. Juho took the initiative before she had a chance to remain discreet, I'll keep it a secret. So, just tell me. What? She became flustered, unlike with her usual, shamelessly confident attitude. Juho was also caught by surprise by the unexpected reaction. You seem flustered. Well, it's just that you were asking so intently. I was. Juho had seen worse. She hadn't been flustered like that back then. Her reaction raised a question in his mind. Why is she so flustered? What is she flustered by? Secret. What? The thing I asked you to tell me. While staring at her face, Juho replayed what he had just said to her. I'll keep it a secret. A secret. The meaning of the word was startling her. It tore down her shamelessness and shook her. There was a rustling sound in Juho's pocket. Aha! Did your friend say the same thing? My friend. Juho took the paper out of his pocket. The friend who found this transcription. Once she took the paper from him, her face turned pale. The end.